Before the first crack shattered the veil of silence, the forest felt eternal, a mosaic of greens in 1,000 shades, where the leaves whispered ancient secrets to the wind, and tall branches formed natural cathedrals beneath a sky painted in soft blue. The ground, layered with dry leaves and bulging roots, concealed the tracks of shy deer and the secret trails of anteaters, armadillos, and ocelots. It was a land where nature breathed in peace, and no one could imagine that the very air in just a few hours would turn into burning poison. There, in a small clearing surrounded by twisted trees and thick moss, lived a fragile and dreamy figure. Leah, a 7-year-old girl, the only child of a humble family who lived on the edge of a rural village. With hazel eyes and unrestrained curiosity, she would often escape adult supervision to play in the woods, collect shiny pebbles, talk to butterflies, and listen to the forest's sounds as if they were stories told just for her. Leah loved that place. She felt like part of it, as if the tree's roots ran through her own veins. That morning, she had slipped out early, even before breakfast was ready. With a rag doll in her arms and bare feet, she followed a narrow trail, hopping from stone to stone until she vanished into the underbrush. Her father, busy fixing a fence, didn't notice. Her mother thought she was in the backyard, drawing in the dirt. No one saw when the girl entered the forest, and no one heard the first warm breath drifting in from the north. The tragedy began slowly, as most great tragedies do. A wisp of smoke danced on the horizon, faint, almost poetic. Then came the smell, something between burnt wood and an invisible warning. The animals began to stir. Flocks of birds cut through the sky in fleeing formation, and the jungle's silence broke with howler monkeys' cries and the rushed steps of creatures rarely seen in daylight. The flames crawled low, ravenous, like orange serpents slithering through dry branches. The wind, an unintentional accomplice, blew fiercely toward the densest part of the woods, exactly where Leah was playing. The trees that once offered shelter became traps. The trails vanished in the soot, and the once clear sky darkened under a thick cloud of smoke and embers. By the time the adults noticed the child's absence and ran in panic with buckets and desperate shouts, deep in the forest, Leah was already feeling the heat closing in. She didn't know where it came from or where to run. She cried quietly, trying not to make noise, as if she could hide from the fire itself. But she wasn't alone. A few kilometers away in another clearing, a place no one usually went, a place even hunters respected, a dog rested in the shade of a lichen-covered rock. He wasn't an ordinary dog, nor was he young. His fur, once black, was now stained with the ashes of time. His eyes, empty, cloudy, hadn't seen in years. An old accident had left him blind. Since then, he'd lived alone, wandering through the woods like a shadow among the trunks, surviving on scraps guided only by scent and the ancient memory of one who had known life in its cruelest form. They called him Escuro, not out of malice, but out of respect. He was a legend in the village. Some said he had belonged to an old lumberjack who died alone in the woods, and the dog had refused to leave ever since. Others swore he only appeared when someone was in danger. Truth or myth, he was real, and that afternoon when the forest caught fire, he too smelled the smoke. But what he heard mattered even more. Amid the crackling wood, the fluttering wings in retreat, and the distant roar of fire, one specific sound sliced the air like a blade, the cry of a child. Sharp, continuous, desperate. Escuro slowly raised his head, tilted his ears slightly, and remained still for a few seconds. The wind carried him the invisible coordinates of danger, and even without sight, even without understanding why, he rose to his feet. With steady steps, sharp instinct, and the kind of courage only those who have lost everything can carry, the blind dog walked toward a sound no one else could hear. Long before the fire consumed the forest and fate crossed his path with Leah's, Escuro was already part of the woods, though few ever noticed him. He was no longer a pup, nor did he resemble the tame dogs that ran around fenced yards. His body was long and sturdy, marked with visible scars beneath his thick, coarse fur. His paws were strong and caked with dirt, telling the tale of a lifetime carved through wild trails. His ears were always alert, as if they could hear not only the sounds of the world, but also its hidden secrets. But it was his eyes, or rather, the lack of them, that left the strongest impression. Completely white, lifeless, unmoving. As if light had abandoned that body, Yet the soul stayed behind, shining from within. No one knew exactly how Escuro had lost his sight. Stories varied. Some claimed he had been born that way, the result of a curse or divine punishment. Others swore he had been attacked by a jaguar while trying to protect his former master. There were even those who said Escuro had chosen blindness to forget something he saw, but should never have. But the truth, buried deep in legend and silence, was that Escuro once had a home. His name wasn't always Escuro. He was once called Thunder, because of the strength of his bark and the energy he carried in his youth. He belonged to a lumberjack named Nilo, a solitary man who lived in a secluded cabin, built wooden furniture, and spoke more with trees than with people. It was Nilo who had found the pup trapped in a hunting snare, and despite the deep gash in his paw, carried him home, tending to him with leaves, salves, and patient hands. Thunder grew up strong, loyal, the old man's faithful guardian. It's said he followed Nilo everywhere, from chopping wood to cooking cornmeal porridge. But fate, cruel as it is, decided that peace wouldn't last. One stormy night, when the sky seemed ready to split the earth in two, lightning struck the cabin. Nilo was sleeping. Thunder was out hunting. When he returned, there was only smoke, ashes, and the unbearable scent of farewell. He ran in circles, dug with his paws, barked at the charred walls. He found his master's body among the rubble, still warm. He tried to drag him, pull him, save him, but he couldn't. He lay beside him for hours until the smoke and tears burned his eyes beyond repair. Days later, a hunter spotted him wandering through the forest, staggering, his eyes filled with pus, dark as wet charcoal. From that day on, he never saw again. Blindness didn't stop him from living, but it changed everything. Escuro learned to hear the world, to listen to the air's movement through leaves, the snap of a twig, the slow crawl of a snake, the heartbeat of a deer in flight. He learned to smell direction, to sense vibrations in the ground before danger arrived. He became so entwined with the forest that even the animals seemed to respect him. He wasn't hunted or attacked. He didn't hunt either. He became a living ghost that moved among the trees, appearing at dusk, vanishing by dawn. Sometimes he showed up near the road that linked the village to the woods. Other times he appeared suddenly beside someone who was injured, as if he could smell pain. Some say he once saved a capybara pup from a trap. Others swear they saw him escort a lost boy to the main clearing, but he never stayed. He never let anyone touch him. He never allowed himself to be owned again. Escuro was free, but he was not indifferent, and that made all the difference on the day the forest began to burn. That afternoon, when the smoke started to tint the air with hues of fear, Escuro sensed something different. It wasn't just the smell of burning wood. That scent had followed him since the day he lost his master. It was something sharper, more urgent, the scent of human desperation. Hot sweat mixed with fresh tears, and a sound, a child's cry, long, trembling, choked. The kind of cry from someone who doesn't understand what's happening, but feels they're standing on the edge of something fatal. Escuro stood still for a few seconds. His ears rotated slowly, like radars. His nose twitched. His chest rose and fell more quickly. And then, without hesitation, he started walking. Not away, not to save himself, but straight into the smoke, toward the heart of the danger, toward the child who was crying. The forest around him was a living tapestry of sound. The crunch of dry leaves under paw, the muffled roar of distant flames, the desperate buzz of insects, the wing beats of birds fleeing to the skies. But Escuro filtered it all. He followed only what mattered, the sound of life crying for help. With each step, he crossed invisible thresholds. Branches scratched his back, thorns tore at his paws, smoke scorched his nostrils. But his senses had never been sharper. Every gust of wind carried a new clue, every sound a new direction, and he knew, if he stopped, even for a moment, it would be too late. The darkness in his eyes was absolute, but he saw with something older, something stronger than sight, instinct. And in that moment, it was instinct that led him directly to Leah. It all began with a dry snap, small, almost insignificant, like the sound of a twig breaking under the weight of a light animal. But there in the forest, already parched by days of relentless heat, that snap became the spark of the end. The sun hadn't even reached its peak when a breeze, hotter than usual, swept across the treetops. spreading the acrid scent of smoke among the leaves. The fire, still invisible, was already crawling beneath the underbrush, eating away at the forest from the inside out. Like a stealthy predator creeping forward in silence until it strikes. Leah, sitting on a moss-covered rock, didn't notice. She was holding her ragdoll to her chest and humming an invented melody, without hurry, the way children do before they learn to fear time. She was mesmerized by a line of ants carrying pieces of leaves, a mission that to her seemed nothing short of magic. The world's noise felt far away, until the second snap came, louder, closer, and then the third, now with a metallic echo as if the forest itself were groaning. She stood up slowly. The birds had stopped singing. The air, once fresh and damp, now felt heavy and hard to breathe. A plume of smoke drifted between the trees to her left. Then she heard it, a deep dragging sound like a tree falling. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and finally, she saw the fire, red, alive, dancing between the bushes as if celebrating its triumphant arrival. Instinct screamed louder than reason. Leah ran, barefoot, her hair tied in two messy braids, her face stained with dirt. She ran like never before, but the forest, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now became a living maze. Every familiar trail looked different. Every tree felt like an obstacle. The smoke was already stinging her eyes and slicing her breath like invisible blades. She stumbled twice. The third time, she fell. The doll slipped from her hands and was swallowed by a burning bush. Leah tried to go back, but the heat drove her away with a scream. Her chest tightened. The air she pulled into her lungs was too hot, too filthy. Fear exploded like thunder inside her ribs. Alone in the heart of a burning forest, all Leah could do was cry. She cried loudly. She cried as if the sound could reach someone, as if someone might hear and come running. And someone did. Escuro was hundreds of meters away. He moved with difficulty, guided by an invisible map made of scents and sounds. His fur was already singed, and smoke cloaked his body like a shroud. But he didn't stop. Every sob from Leah was like a sonic compass pulling him forward, a primal call only he seemed to understand. His nose, hypersensitive, recognized fear. The anguish of a child had a distinct, unmistakable smell, a mix of sweat, tears, and despair that clung to the air like fresh paint. Trees were falling behind him one by one. The fire now roared like an enraged beast. Burning branches rained from the sky. The ground erupted in small blazes, as if every leaf were a fuse of dry gunpowder, and still the blind dog pressed on. He dodged flaming trunks, leapt over smoldering roots, avoided the heat as if he could see it. But he couldn't. What he saw was something stronger than light, the image that sound painted in his mind. With every step, Escuro saw the world through noise, the crackle of wood, the hiss of smoke, the choked cry of a child. Leah now curled against the trunk of a thick tree, trying to make her body disappear. She trembled. She sobbed. She called for her mother in a hoarse voice, but no longer believed anyone would hear her. The fire seemed to have a cruel plan: surround her, intimidate her, suffocate her little by little, as if it wanted to play with its prey before the final strike. And then through the dense haze a shadow appeared, a four-legged figure low to the ground, covered in soot, eyes without light but head held high like an ancient knight in the heart of chaos. Escuro approached slowly, sniffing carefully, until the girl's scent became crystal clear. He stopped, let out a soft growl. Leah saw him and at first recoiled in fear, but the dog didn't move closer. He simply stood there still, as if saying, "I found you. Now you must trust me." Maybe it was the look, even though he was blind. Or maybe it was the fact that in that moment any sign of life felt like a blessing. Whatever it was, Leah, between sobs and tears, extended a trembling hand and touched the dog's scorched snout. Escuro gently licked her fingers as if sealing a pact, and in silence she understood. He had come to save her. And then, side by side, the girl and the blind dog began to walk back, with no map, no clear direction, guided only by the most powerful instinct in nature, the will to protect life. In the absence of sight, Escuro's world was built from sound and scent, a chaotic symphony now turning into screams, crackling branches, and choking smoke. For any other animal, that would have meant only the end, but for him, it was the beginning of the mission. With the girl behind him, still frightened and coughing through tears, the blind dog became a guide, a shield, a living compass in the heart of hell. And every step forward was more than an act of courage. It was a defiance of fate itself. The forest was no longer the same. The once familiar paths had vanished beneath ash and fallen trees. The smoke blurred everything, even the sounds, which now seemed to come from all directions at once. But Escuro's sense of smell, sharp as that of an ancestral wolf, was his secret weapon. He could detect the wind's direction, the fire's presence, the safest, or least deadly, route. And above all, he could smell the girl, like an anchor keeping him focused on what mattered most. With every turn, a new obstacle emerged. A burning branch fell right in front of them, forcing them to change direction. A nest of embers on the ground scorched Escuro's paws and made Leah cry out in pain as her bare feet stepped into the heat. But Escuro never stopped. Sometimes he turned toward her and let out a low, firm growl, as if saying, "Keep going, don't stop now." He had never spoken a single word, but in that moment every movement was a silent speech of bravery. Leah followed him with trembling steps. She cried less now, perhaps from exhaustion. Perhaps because deep down, she sensed that this blind, burned, strange dog was her only chance to survive. The tears had dried on her dirty face, and though fear was still present, it no longer paralyzed her. There was something about the way Escuro moved forward without hesitation, despite not seeing that inspired trust. He was like an arrow shot blindly into the dark, no guarantee of hitting the target, but with all the strength in the world behind it. At one point, Escuro stopped. He sniffed the air intensely, turned his head left and then right. The girl stopped too. The silence surrounding them was more terrifying than the fire's roar. Something had changed. The wind, the direction of the flames, the path they were following was now a trap about to close, and then he made his decision. He veered off onto a steeper trail, thick with branches and tall thorns. Leah hesitated, but Escuro let out a sudden, deep bark that made it clear there was no other option. They climbed through twisted roots, leaves that burned at the touch and slippery rocks covered in soot. The girl stumbled many times. At one point she fell to her knees and stayed down. She cried, said she couldn't go on, that she was thirsty, that everything hurt. Escuro returned to her. He touched her face with his snout, smelled her forehead like a mother smells her sleeping child, and then, without warning, lay down beside her, letting her rest against his warm body. He offered her shelter. She accepted, and they stayed like that for a few minutes, two wounded beings enduring together while the forest slowly died around them. But time was no ally. The breeze that had once helped now whipped the fire forward, speeding the flames toward them. Escuro stood up first. He shook the ash from his back and barked once more, short and hoarse. Leah understood, and even in pain, she stood and began walking again. Then they reached the hardest part. A fallen tree blocked the path, its flaming branches like fiery tentacles. Escuro didn't back down. He circled, sniffed both sides, until he found a narrow gap between the roots and the earth, a space barely wide enough for a small body. He looked at Leah, let out a low growl and pointed with his snout. That was the way. It was tight, dark, and hot, but it was their only chance. Leah crawled beneath the root, feeling the earth scratch her arms and the smoke burn her throat. Escuro came last. He pushed the thickest branch aside with his body, and though scorched by the embers, forced his way through. When they emerged on the other side, they were breathless, burned, filthy, but alive. The forest still burned, but now in the distance something new could be heard. Voices, human voices, shouts, rushing footsteps. It was the rescue team, the villagers, the firefighters. Escuro recognized them. He smelled the diesel, the urban smoke, the collective sweat. He knew they were close, but he also knew the hardest part was yet to come. The final stretch. A small stream now surrounded by fire on both sides, with fallen trunks blocking the crossing. They had to cross, and there was only one way. The fire advanced like a ravenous beast, spreading its glowing claws across everything it touched. Each tree that fell was the scream of a forest in agony, each flame a whisper of death drawing closer. At the center of this apocalypse, a child and a blind dog fought for life, pushed forward by a force that defied the impossible, the will to keep going. Leah, her face now streaked with soot and dry tears, felt her skin burn even where there were no flames. It was as if the very air had turned into fire. Her hands trembled, her scraped knees bled, and her breath came in ragged sobs. But she kept walking, not out of courage but because of him, because of that strange, silent dog who, even without sight, seemed to see everything. Every obstacle, every trap laid by the burning woods, every safe inch of ground amidst the chaos. Escuro was the beacon in that starless night. The sound of the creek came first, a muffled murmur, almost swallowed by the fury of the blaze. But Escuro heard it, and that's where he led the girl. When they reached the muddy riverbank, they found the worst. The fire had already crossed to the other side. The safe path that might lead them to the road, and with luck to rescue, was now blocked by a wall of flames, dancing like serpents in ecstasy. There were no bridges, no shortcuts, only the stream itself, now shallow, flowing over hot stones, fallen trunks, and drifting ash. Leah collapsed, fell to her knees in the mud, sobbing with the last of her strength. "I can't do it," she repeated between gasps. But her cry wasn't alone. From within the smoke another voice echoed, a hoarse shout growing louder by the second. "Leah." She froze. She knew that voice. It was her father. He was on the other side. She couldn't see him, but he was there, shouting her name like his heart was about to burst. Leah stood, stumbling, and screamed back, "Daddy, I'm here." Her cry cut through the smoke like lightning. Hope sparked in the darkness. But between reunion and salvation stood an abyss. The creek was no longer just an obstacle. It was a line of fire. A flaming branch exploded to the left. A tree chunk crashed behind them. The forest was collapsing. Time, already scarce, no longer existed. Escuro sensed the danger. He turned his body, scanning with what remained of his instincts. Then, he decided. He stepped in front of the girl, growling like a warrior in enemy territory. He placed himself between her and the flames. With his body, he blocked sparks, crackles, and burning splinters flying through the air. It was as if he were saying, "I'll go first." With a powerful bark, he leapt onto the first stone in the stream. The water was boiling, but he kept going. 1, 2, 3 stones, each hotter than the last. His fur was already scorched, his paws burned, but he did not stop. Behind him, Leah followed, step by step, terrified, but trusting. Escuro was the bridge, the only possible way. On the other side, voices shouted, "She's there! There's someone with her! It's a dog!" The men ran, reached out their hands, shone flashlights, but they were still too far. The final stretch remained, the most dangerous. A tree had fallen across the creek, now burning like a live torch, blocking the passage. Leah stopped. Escuro didn't. He faced the tree, as if he saw in it the final challenge. He took a step back, gathered strength, and jumped. A blind leap, calculated only by muscle memory, the wind on his snout, the sound of water below, and he landed. Leah tried to follow, but she was too small, too fragile. She couldn't make that leap alone. Escuro returned to the edge, barked at her, barked with urgency. She cried, "I can't. Help me." And then he did the unthinkable. He nudged her forward with his head, guiding her to the edge. Then, positioning himself behind her, he crouched, and with a push from his hind legs, launched her forward with his back. She flew over the tree, landed on the other side, rolling on the damp ground until a firefighter caught her. She screamed, "Where's the dog? Where's the dog?" But Escuro didn't appear right away. The final jump had hurt him. His body had slammed into the burning wood. His front legs bled. His fur was aflame. But still he gathered the last of his strength and jumped. He fell hard, groaned, lay there for a few seconds. Leah ran to him, wrapping her arms around him, getting even dirtier with his blood and soot. She sobbed in relief and in fear. "Don't let him die. Please don't let him die." The men rushed in, doused the dog with water, wrapped him in a tarp, and began running. One of them asked, "This dog, he's blind? How did he do it?" Another replied, "Because he saw what we didn't. He saw with his heart." And there, in the longest night the village had ever known, a legend was born. The legend of the blind dog who, without eyes, saw what others could not, and saved a life with the purest force in nature, the instinct to love. The sky was no longer sky. It was a churning grey dome, alive, shifting like a wounded beast. Above them, a heaving mass of smoke blanketed the forest like a shroud of agony. The sunlight had vanished, swallowed by thick clouds of ash and the red reflections of the flames that licked the world like they were starving for more. time no longer moved in minutes. It moved in heartbeats, in sobs, in the roaring of fire. And within that nightmare unfolding without end, Escuro and Leah's escape began to feel like a miracle. They were on the right side of the stream, but that didn't mean they were safe. The flames, merciless, raced over low brush, leapt from tree to tree like countless predators, spreading heat and terror in every direction. The path to the village, to safety, still demanded far more than strength. It demanded luck, and Escuro knew luck was scarce in that place. The girl no longer spoke. Her body moved out of reflex, instinct, pure survival. Her face, once lit by childhood, was now a mask of dirt, soot, and fear. Her breath came shallow and broken, as if it could extinguish at any moment. Escuro could feel it. He sniffed her with every step, paused to listen, nudged her forward when she slowed down. He was a dog on a mission, but now, beyond being a guide, he was also a bodyguard, a father, a silent hero, and time charged a high price for every lost second. Behind them, the fire roared. Ahead, the path split. Escuro stopped. The memory of scent, etched by years of solitude in those woods, revealed two routes. One led to a stone wall, shorter but steep and slick, where falling was nearly certain. The other wound through dense bamboo groves, longer but less exposed to fire, yet full of traps, burrows, pits, loose roots. Escuro sniffed both. He chose. He led Leah into the bamboo. There the heat was muffled, more humid, the ground unstable, but the smoke was thinner. The stalks snapped around them, whistling like wooden serpents. At one point, Escuro heard a different sound, a crack, softer, like the sound of flesh. A trap? No. It was his own body sounding the alarm, reaching its limit. Escuro stumbled, paused. The girl stepped close, touched his neck and felt his skin burning, almost glowing. He had burned part of his back, his blood mixed with ash. Still, he didn't collapse. With a lift of his head, he signaled they had to go on, and they did. Suddenly, a deafening crash. A massive tree fell beside them, opening a clearing of destruction, launching ash and embers into the air. The fall created a smoke curtain so thick that Leah got lost. She screamed for Escuro, coughed, fell. He didn't respond right away. She screamed again. And then, like a silent thunder, his silhouette appeared through the smoke. He had gone around. He came back for her. Injured, near collapse, he refused to leave her behind. In that moment, Leah clung to him tightly, buried her fingers in his scorched fur, cried again, less from fear, more from gratitude. "You're my angel," she murmured between sobs. And he, not knowing what angel meant, or even what a word was, simply understood. Because love in that instant didn't need to be spoken. It was there, in the pain, in the chaos, and it was stronger than fire. The clearing ahead looked promising. But there was a new enemy, a circle of thick, nearly solid smoke that blocked all vision. With each step, Leah closed her eyes by instinct, and Escuro, truly blind, now guided someone who also couldn't see. His blindness had become an advantage. He didn't need light. He was the light. Then came the sound. Again, voices, footsteps, men running, sirens. Escuro turned his head. He recognized it. But something blocked their way. Ahead, between them and the sound of salvation, a wide trench had opened. A landslide caused by the fallen tree minutes earlier. It was deep, uneven, impossible for Leah to cross alone, and there was no time. The fire approached from behind like a living wall. What Escuro did then defied every training manual. He positioned himself by the edge, sniffed the rim, stepped back, and with a painful leap, jumped to the other side. He landed, groaned, but stayed standing. From the other side, he turned his body and barked, the first long bark since it all began. It was a call, an invitation, a command. Leah hesitated, cried, trembled. "I can't," she whispered. But then, from across the pit, a firefighter shouted, "Jump, sweetheart, we're here, we'll catch you, come on." Escuro barked again, louder, urgent, and with one last breath of courage, Leah ran and jumped. The world paused for a second. The air seemed to hold its breath. And then strong arms caught her midair, lifted her, and cheers exploded. She had made it, she was safe. And Escuro, he collapsed, His legs finally gave out. He lay there on the wet ground. The firefighters rushed in, tried to lift him. Leah cried and screamed, "Don't leave him, please, he saved me." And even with his body broken on the edge of death, Escuro wagged his tail one last time. Weak, but happy. Because his mission was complete. He defied death and won. The ground trembled beneath the firefighters' boots. The forest, now overtaken by flames and collapse, released its final breaths like a dying giant. Each falling tree felt like a column of an ancient temple being torn down. But amidst the destruction and the thick smoke, a small group had gathered around a scene that no one there would ever forget. A blind, exhausted dog lying on scorched earth, his head resting in the small hands of a girl who had just been pulled from death's grip moments earlier. Escuro could barely breathe. His chest rose and fell slowly, weaker each time. His once thick coat was now a mix of ash, dried blood, and burned fur. His front legs were raw. One of his clouded eyes had closed completely, and yet he tried to stay awake. Every time Leah sobbed and called for him, he twitched his ears or moved his tail as if to say, "I'm here. I'm still with you." One of the firefighters, kneeling beside him, whispered with a choked voice, "This dog is a miracle. He did what none of us would have done in his place." Another, holding a damp blanket, gently helped wrap the dog. But Escuro didn't want to leave. He turned his head toward the girl, or rather he felt her presence, and seemed to resist. His mission wasn't done. He needed to see her safe. Then a tall man, covered in soot, his face soaked in sweat and tears, came running. It was Leah's father. When he saw her kneeling, hugging the dog, he shouted her name with his entire soul. "Leah!" She jumped up, ran into his arms, and cried as if everything she'd held back was breaking loose at once. He held her tight, kissed her forehead, her soot-covered hair, her ash-smudged cheeks. But soon she pointed behind them, shouting, "The dog! Daddy, the dog! He saved me! He came back for me!" The man turned, still trying to grasp it all, and saw Escuro lying there, surrounded by firefighters. He approached carefully, knelt beside the animal, and gently touched his head. Escuro moved his snout toward him. He sniffed. He recognized. It was the same scent of despair he had followed hours earlier, now mixed with relief. Leah's father, saying nothing, removed his shirt and laid it over the dog, then looked at the firefighters and spoke firmly. "He's coming with us. He saved my daughter. He's family now." The rescue was immediate. A group of men improvised a stretcher with wood and rope. They laid Escuro on it with care and carried him along the narrow trail, already being devoured by fire. Leah, still in her father's arms, never took her eyes off the dog, and every time the stretcher rocked, she shouted, "Careful! He's hurt!" The path to the road was another battle. Fire blocked parts of the way, forcing the group to clear new routes. Branches fell without warning, and the smoke left most of them with burning eyes and throats. But no one stopped. The story of the hero dog had spread among the firefighters. Each one of them wanted to be part of that rescue. It wasn't just about saving an animal. It was a symbol, something beyond understanding. Hours later, at the aid station set up at the village's edge, Escuro was placed on a metal table covered with clean cloth and saline solution. A makeshift veterinary team, volunteers and locals, did their best to stabilize him. Cuts were cleaned, paws bandaged, burns treated with ointments and care. Leah never left his side. She lay beside him, her head resting on his chest, listening to the sound of his heart, faint but steady. And then, in one of those beats, the impossible happened. Escuro lifted his head, still trembling, and licked the girl's face. It was a simple gesture, a quick touch, but in that moment, everyone was crying. Firefighters, parents, villagers, vets. Everyone understood that this blind dog wasn't just a survivor. He was a living legend. And then came the final leap. Days later, when Escuro had been transferred to a proper clinic, when news of the rescue had spread across newspapers, radio, and social media, when Leah was home again and the forest had begun to heal with the arrival of rain, something extraordinary happened. The dog who had lost everything in life was brought for the first time into a real home, with a bed, food, love, and a child who called him my hero every single day. And on the first night, while everyone slept, he got up from his cushion, walked into the girl's room and laid beside her bed, as if to say, "Now I see, with my heart, I see it all. The forest, now blanketed in ash, looked like a black and white portrait of something that had once been colorful, alive and vibrant. Charred trunks rose like the pillars of a ruined temple, and the air still carried the heavy scent of burnt wood and wounded soil. But among the silent destruction, something endured. It wasn't the vegetation nor the branches. It was the story that spread from mouth to mouth, echoing through dirt roads, slipping into local radio broadcasts, front pages of newspapers, and disbelieving hearts. The story of a blind dog who saved a child from a forest fire. The name Escuro, once known only to a few locals, like a forgotten shadow, now echoed through newscasts in nearby towns, on school bulletin boards, even in conversations at village markets. It was as if everyone wanted to believe that something so pure and heroic could still happen in a world so used to overlooking what it cannot see. And if the forest had gone quiet under the ashes, life outside it now roared with gratitude. Escuro had survived. Barely, yes. He spent days in a makeshift veterinary clinic assembled by volunteers, moved by the story of his rescue. He needed transfusions, special ointments, daily dressings, and enormous doses of patience and hope. His recovery was slow, painful, filled with soft whimpers and empty stares, not because of blindness but because of exhaustion. His body wanted to give up, but his heart, that old warrior, beat with the stubbornness of someone who still had something to protect. During all those days, Leah never left his side. She slept on the clinic floor holding one of his paws. She brought blankets, snacks, and handmade cards decorated with drawings of flowers, trees, hearts, and crooked letters that said, "You saved me. I love you. My four-legged angel." When doctors said he might not make it, she cried quietly and whispered, "He will. Because he found me in the fire. He never gives up." And he didn't. On the morning of the 11th day, Escuro opened his eyes, cloudy but glowing from within. He tried to stand. His legs still hurt, but he managed. One step, then another. When Leah saw him on his feet, she ran to him and hugged him as if the whole world were resting in that dog's ribs. He licked her face, and in that moment something changed. Escuro was no longer just a blind dog. He was a symbol, a legend, a miracle. The tributes began spontaneously. Children at the local school made a banner that read, "Hero of the Forest." Local artists began painting murals on public walls of Escuro's face, always with white eyes and his body standing before flames, shielding a child drawn with wide, innocent eyes. A group of environmentalists launched a campaign called the Escuro Project, aimed at protecting abandoned dogs and reforesting the area affected by the fire. And as if that weren't moving enough, came the most symbolic act of all. Escuro was officially adopted by Leah's family. He received a home with a yard, a custom bed, ceramic bowls with his name, a tag engraved with the words, "I see with my heart," and most importantly, unconditional love. For the first time in a very long time, he no longer needed to hide in the woods or flinch from human touch. Now, when he felt a hand on his neck, he knew it meant affection. And when he heard quick footsteps, he knew it was Leah running to hug him. In that first week at home, Escuro still walked with some difficulty, but with each new day came new progress. He wagged his tail more often, began eating on his own again, slept peacefully, and on a sunny Sunday, while Leah was drawing on the patio with crayons, Escuro lay beside her, his head resting gently on her feet. He didn't bark, he didn't move, he just stayed there, as if to say, "Now it's okay. Now everything is as it should be." And even without seeing the new life around him, Escuro perceived it all. The sound of a child's laughter, the smell of food made with love, the soft breeze carrying the scent of flowers planted in the garden, the laughter echoing from the kitchen, the gentle touch of Leah's fingers stroking his head. He, who once was lost in the darkness of the forest, now lived surrounded by the light that only love can build. The blind dog had defeated death. And in the ashes, a miracle was born. There was something different in the way Escuro walked now. It wasn't just the weight of age or the scars left by the fire. It was the way he, even blind, seemed to recognize every corner of his new home, every step of the girl he had saved, every sound of affection that filled the space around him. He didn't need eyes to see, because he saw with something the world rarely understands, the soul. The story of his rescue didn't stay in the village. It spread across the country. Reports were made, interviews given, tributes organized. Escuro became the subject of magazine articles, documentaries on animal instinct, and even academic studies on empathy in dogs. But while all this was happening outside, inside the house, life moved with simplicity and love. Leah, now chattier than ever, took Escuro wherever she could. He accompanied her to the market, to school, to community events. He was greeted with applause, with flowers, with special treats, and with tears in the eyes of those who saw in him more than a dog. They saw a symbol of everything humanity had lost, but could still reclaim: compassion. The family had a custom collar made for him, soft leather adorned with a small bronze medallion. Etched in delicate letters were the words, "What you can't see with your eyes, you feel with your heart." And whenever someone asked if Escuro was truly blind, Leah always answered with certainty, "He is, but he saw what no one else did. He saw that I needed him." Over time, Escuro received unexpected honors. A public park, reopened after the fire, was named Escuro's Grove. A sculpture of him, created by local artists, was placed at the entrance. A dog with a serene expression, head slightly tilted as if listening to the world. Beside the statue, a plaque read, "Courage doesn't depend on sight. Love doesn't need eyes. And heroes sometimes have 4 legs and see with their soul." Escuro was also taken by NGOs to meet with children in hospitals. Even with physical limitations, his presence was healing. Children with cancer, visually impaired kids, orphans, all seemed to find in him a kind of hope that no words could explain. He would simply walk up, rest his snout gently, lie beside them. And the rest happened in silence, where only the heart can hear. Leah, in turn, developed a deep love for animals. She began dreaming of becoming a veterinarian. She drew pictures, wrote stories about the dog who beat the fire, and told her classmates that her best friend wasn't a person but a warrior. And in many ways he truly was. Escuro was the steady presence that made her feel safe. He was her counselor, her guardian, her companion. When she had nightmares, he was the one she ran to. When she felt sad, she sought him out. And when she laughed, she looked at him, as if sharing a joke only the two of them could understand. And even as the years passed, even as time stole some of Escuro's strength, he never changed. He aged with dignity, became slower, quieter, slept more. But every time Leah stepped into the garden to play, he stood up, even in pain, and followed her. He would lie nearby, alert to the invisible world around her. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because even after surviving the fire, Escuro knew his mission wasn't over, to protect her, always. And so, in a world that so often turns its back on the unseen, a blind dog showed that true vision comes from those who don't blink in the face of danger, who don't close their eyes to pain, who don't turn away when someone needs them, who see through the soul. Escuro had no sight, but he saw what mattered, and because of that, he was immortalized. Over the years, the forest was reborn. The wounded earth was covered with new leaves, and green sprouted from the ashes like nature's fulfilled promise. Burned trunks gave way to new beginnings, and the birdsong, once silenced, returned to fill the sky. But there was something different in that place now, something that lingered between the trees, that drifted on the light morning breeze, that hushed the nights with reverence. The memory of a miracle. The miracle of a blind dog who, on a starless night, became light. Escuro grew old. His body, once agile like a wolf's, now moved slowly. His paws dragged slightly across the dirt path, and his snout no longer picked up scents like before. But his ears, always alert, still sensed what eyes never could. He heard Leah's laughter, now a teenager, the sound of the gate creaking open at dusk, the leaves dancing in the yard, the heartbeat of home, and most importantly, the call of love. On the porch there was a cushion just for him, and every afternoon as the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, Escuro would lie there. Leah would sit beside him, sometimes with a book, sometimes in silence, and between phrases or pauses, she would run her fingers behind his ears, as if she were still the scared little girl from years ago. Sometimes she would whisper, "You still see me, don't you?" And Escuro, without answering, would gently wag his tail. Yes, he still saw. He always would. In the community, he became a timeless symbol. His story was shared in schools, churches, fairs. Children drew him with white eyes and a red heart. A scout group named their troop after him, Patrol Escuro, where courage leads. Once a year, in the same month of the fire, the village organized a symbolic walk along the trail where he had saved Leah. Children brought flowers. Adults lit candles. And at the end, everyone released white balloons into the sky with words of gratitude. But Escuro didn't need monuments, nor plaques. His reward was always right there, in the girl's touch, now grown into a woman, in the love of the family he gained, in the warmth of a home he had never known but finally found. His real trophy was the heartbeat beside his, the peace that replaced the smoke, a silence now filled with rest, not fear. In his last spring, the old warrior rested. It wasn't a dramatic farewell. It was a gentle sigh, a silent surrender. He lay down as he always did beside Leah and remained there. His breathing slowed, as if he knew the path had come to an end. Leah, now grown, lay down next to him. She whispered one final time into his ear, "Thank you for seeing me, when no one else did." Escuro left as he lived, in silence, without asking for anything, without needing applause, but leaving behind a trail that can never be erased. Because some stories never die. They keep walking with us, and Escuro became one of them. Today, along that same trail where the fire once roared, there is a small stone monument with a simple inscription written by Leah. Here, where the forest fell, a dog stood. He had no eyes, but he saw with his soul. He saved my life, and taught me that sometimes light lives in the dark, and if you pass by that place, you might not see anything. You might only hear the rustle of leaves, but if you listen closely, maybe you'll feel something. A presence, a memory, a trace of the purest kind of love. The love of one who didn't need to see to save. The love of a four-legged hero who never needed the light, because he was the light.